Okay, so Anita, we're here to talk about this idea of post-traumatic stress, compassion fatigue, where it affects law enforcement and death investigators. Why is that so important in today's society? Why do we really need to be looking at this topic?
It's interesting, Darren. Back whenever I first stumbled across this phenomenon, I was writing my book, Getting Through What You Can't Get Over. And this was only a couple of years ago. At that time, I knew, though, that it was something I was beginning to see really grow and magnify in the everyday person. What I didn't know at that time was the impact that that would have on those who work in law enforcement, first responders, death investigators, those folks who are subjected to really traumatic situations on a regular basis. What we've seen since then, however, is mind-boggling because very quickly what has been more of a silent suffering is being displayed outwardly in people, and we're seeing it across the media. When you see these rival groups and rivalries that really didn't exist to the magnitude that they do today, a lot of that is rooted in secondary traumatic stress or compassion fatigue. And
that's what we're seeing now, like you said, in the media and how things are being portrayed. And of course, a lot of that stress is brought home. That adds to the divorce rates and things like that we're going to talk about. But that's why it's important, and I agree, is that we have to figure out how we can control this on ourselves so that we maintain our jobs, we don't end up overstepping our bounds, and we protect our families and our mental health.
Yes, and one of the things that I hope to give voice to as we discuss more and more openly in our culture about compassion fatigue is the impact it does have not just in the workplace but also in our home lives. I think many times when those who work in these kinds of conditions have that situation where it's not appropriate for you to come home and discuss all of the details with your spouse, your children, your extended family members, trying to bottle that up and hold it in even adds to the pressures. And as I often say, human beings are like volcanoes. When we stuff things down, that's like magma in a volcano. And a volcano, if it has an occasional vent, a small vent, it releases that pressure. And what that does is it diminishes the likelihood of a huge explosion.
Right, and that's when we take it out on our family.
Yes.
And we explode with our spouse, or even we explode with a coworker or our supervisor.
Yes. Or sadly, maybe even with the victim's family.
True.
Or something that happens out in a crime scene. Maybe, we react in a way that later on we regret, but we're coming from a very emotional place. And the fact that sometimes we try to stuff our emotions actually makes us more volatile and more prone to losing control of those very emotions.
Yes, I agree.
So another thing that I really think is important for us to discuss is the fact that compassion fatigue is not part of our regular conversation in our culture.
That's right.
It's something that was identified in the 1950s, actually in the nursing community. And what they found was that the more exposure that those who worked with trauma had, the less likely they were to feel compassion. So that's exactly where the layman's term compassion fatigue comes from. But there needs to be a balance, and making sure that we are objective, that we are taking care of those practical details that we need to do on the job. We need to be logical. We need to be fact-driven. But also having care, concern, compassion for other people, being considerate and respectful of their feelings, and not making assumptions based on maybe something that happened in a totally different set of circumstances. Don't carry that, don't project that into these people or this situation and assume that just because other people or in another case this happened, it's automatically going to happen this time as well.
Yeah, and the empathy thing is important for law enforcement as a whole, but for death investigators. Empathy is important because we're dealing with families. Mm-hmm. You sometimes you can show sympathy, but we're generally showing empathy. But when you get to the point that you can't even show empathy to a family member of a decedent, then you have crossed that line of where either burnout or this overabundance of stress, which is actually the same thing. And so that's a big warning sign. When you don't even have empathy or can't even feign empathy anymore for a decedent's family, it's time to get help or get out.
Right. Conduct ourselves with both humility and respect, that we begin to see healing take place, and we begin to see some of the things bridge, some of these problems that we're seeing right now between groups. I saw the other day one of the most beautiful things. We're in a political environment on top of everything else right now, and there was a video taken of a Caucasian police officer, and he joined hands with some African American folks who were outside the convention center at one of the caucuses there. And they joined hands together and prayed. Now, this is directly on the heels of lives being lost because of fighting and because people are not listening to each other and they're not respecting each other. But yet, you see this small group of people come together. You see them show compassion. When they were done praying, they hugged each other. The smiles on their faces, the pats on the arm that is a universal sign of acceptance. All of that took place. And this video, I don't even know how many millions of views it's had now, but it's been huge. This is the thing. All of us have the ability, one person at a time, one small group at a time, to begin to make that difference. You may not think you're making a difference. You have the ability to make a difference with every action that you take.
Yes, and your video example points something out very good. Is that in the climate that we have of stress with law enforcement versus the society, it's all minorities. It's small groups. Mm-hmm. It isn't every white police officer. No. It isn't every African American. It isn't every Latino American. And that's a problem. And when it comes to trying to deal with stress in the job and all this, we got to be careful not to lump everything together. Is there some racial indifferences in the world? Of course there is. But it's not just in America. Every race, there's people in every race that don't like the other race. There's Latino Americans that don't like Black Americans. There's Black Americans that don't like white Americans, and vice versa, and whatever. But that's not the majority.
No.
And so whenever we come together, that's like your video shows, and majority, then we don't have to deal with the stress that we're having. So I say that to say this. Whether we're working death investigation or working street patrol, we need to be more involved in the lives of the people that we work with every day, the citizens. Because we're talking about stress. We're talking about post-traumatic stress. We're talking about compassion fatigue. We're talking about taking this job home with us. I started out earlier saying part of the stress of our job is to deal with, does everybody in my district hate me because of my skin color?
Right.
Whether you're black or white.
Mm-hmm.
So that's part of taking this stress home. So I say we need to build relationships. And I know that that's another whole topic in and of itself, and we're almost rabbit trailing here. But my point is I don't want us to leave this training and not remember that the problem that's played out in the media is a minor problem. It's a major problem. It's only between minor groups.
Yeah, and I was it's given major exposure.
It's given major exposure. Of the thousands of police officers in America, if there's an issue, it's minor. There's all kinds of studies and statistics of whether one race or group gets affected more or less. I'm not talking about that. I'm not talking about those things. I'm talking about one man to another man, just to build a relationship.
And precisely how you go about that, and this is a thing that I'm currently seeing lacking from those who are fighting. Many people are not fighting. Many of us don't want to fight.
Yeah, that's right.
We want to work together. We want to have a relationship with each other. I care about the concerns of those people that maybe are different from me for many different reasons. They can be different in gender. They can be different in skin color. They can be different from nationality. It doesn't matter what the differences are. I want to learn from you. I want to learn about you. I want to care about you.
Right.
That's an intentional thing. how we can go about this, and especially for those who have compassion fatigue or secondary traumatic stress, and you're not feeling it. You don't feel that emotional connection to want to establish a relationship with someone else who's different from you for whatever reason they're different from you. Do this. Make it a decision. Don't make it based on how you feel. Decide, become intentional, and do the thing that's not currently happening between those who are fighting. Don't talk at people. That's what everybody's doing. They're trying to talk over each other. Listen. Ask questions. When you ask that question, don't interrupt and cut them off. Let them finish their sentences. Hear them out. Even if you don't agree with them, you know what? It's okay to respectfully agree to disagree. That's appropriate. But this thing about trying to be a right fighter, trying to outdo everybody else and prove how you're right, quit trying to prove something and begin to really listen to people. Really focus on the actions that say that I care. Because I can promise you that if you focus on the actions, the feelings will follow.
Right.